Today we're going to talk with Lisa Schmidt about our First Amendment rights, censorship, and the freedom of speech that we have for putting up a sign here that you just simply had a run-in with your homeowners association. So let's start out by showing the sign that you put up.
Okay.
This is the, you put this up in your front yard.
Yes, just like this.
Stand up for religious freedom. Pretty basic.
I thought it was a great message. I still think it's a great message. Who can be against religious freedom? It doesn't matter what you believe. It's a good message.
Yeah. So you put this up in your front lawn, thinking that, well, that's a good message. You just said we turned from a, here, I'll lay it down here. We turned from a seminar, or was it, that you went to?
It was actually a Stand Up for Religious Freedom event.
Okay, so you came back fired up, and I thought, yeah, we ought to do that. So you put it up in your front yard, and it wasn't very long. A few days, you got a phone call that said, you got to take that down.
It took actually less than a day, but I didn't hear the message until 2 days later, which bought me the weekend. And by the time I had the conversation with our HOA manager, our homeowners association manager, I was in a period of discernment what to do.
Okay, so you live right here in Vancouver in Mount Vista.
Technically, it's Ridgefield, but 2 blocks to the south, it's Vancouver. I'm right on the line, right up behind Washington State University.
Okay, so you thought you had the freedom, of course, to put up Stand Up for Religious Freedom sign, which is, I mean, a First Amendment in our Bill of Rights is to ensure that we never have our freedom of speech abridged that way. Was it a surprise when you got that phone call?
It was. I was really taken aback because I knew that they had created a rule about signs, but this sign seemed so, to me it wouldn't have been any different from the "you've been couged," you've been couged, that WSU was, I know, I'm familiar.
Heard that sign.
Yes, and they have some promotional things,
okay.
and I've seen some other people put up, now we have the support our postal services, and I didn't see this as any different. Sure.
So it seems reasonable. So the homeowners association contacted you and said, you got to take that down. That was a surprise to you?
It was.
How did you respond?
I questioned the rule. I welcomed the conversation. I was glad to speak and say, how did this, can you explain some of the intention in it? I'd just like to better understand. And she said, it's the rule, just flat out, and I'd like to email you the RCW that gives us the authority to do this.
In other words, she was saying Washington state law, RCW's Washington state law, says that the homeowners association has the right to tell you to take your sign down.
Yes. Did
she send it to you?
She did. She emailed me the copy, and clearly you can see that homeowners associations were given some ability to navigate about signs. And the specifics of the law basically state that the homeowners associations have the right and privilege of creating placement and manner. And so what is interesting, as this is still going on, is that this has become a question of time, because the particular homeowner association that I live in, their rule states that I could place a political sign up prior to 45 days of an election.
That's interesting, 45 days, because here we have a primary election. We just had our primary election. And the general election is coming up in November. That's, 90 days from the primary, I believe, something like that. And between those times, when somebody's going to get involved with the primary, they don't want to take down their signs and wait for November. Normally, they're going to keep them up through that whole campaign season. Do you see political signs in your neighborhood?
I may be the only one right now.
Out of 400 and some people.
That has made this a little interesting for this process. There is one that is kind of on the side a little bit, that it looks like they mowed their grass and someone didn't come back and pick it up. The rule in our association is after the election, and doesn't matter if it's a primary or general, the sign must be taken down 5 days after. Now, my signs are still in my yard. Actually, all of them. This was the one who started me out.
So you did not take down your sign.
My signs.
When you read the state law that they quoted to you, it looked like they had some ability to be able to regulate. But if I understand correctly, and I'm kind of fishing here, what I've been told is that you cannot sign away your constitutional rights. If you move into a neighborhood, and even if you sign your CC&Rs, you sign these covenants that basically say, I agree to abide by these, that no one has the right to, even if you sign it, for you to sign over your constitutional rights. Is that right?
However, there was a very particular conversation with our association president, because the manager had spoken with me, and so it seemed to be going through it was a friendly fashion of which, Lisa, could I speak with you? And so we had a conversation, and in that telephone conversation I was told, Lisa, you signed away your constitutional rights when you moved into this neighborhood. And I had a little fun with that. Our whole family was like, does that mean we don't have to follow the speed limit? Because then if I get pulled over, then can I say, you are not in the United States of America any longer. You are now right here. And, and so it really created some interesting dialogue.
To say the least. You had Channel 2 come out and do a story on you. You had the local newspaper come out and do a story on you, because people in the United States here, we care about our freedom of speech, and that is a form of freedom of speech. It's so fundamental.
Right.
And so you were standing up at this point for your freedom of speech. You're saying, I'm not going to take the sign down. It doesn't look to me like you have the right to do that. Is that what you did? Or did you ever take it down?
It's never been down. It has stayed up.
So you decided to stand up and say no.
It came up I put the sign up in May. And of course, we had the conversation, and I may have very well been the very first person in all 30 years of this association's existence of anyone who ever contested the rules. Leave it to Lisa. and so that conversation, it was a Monday morning, and I had spent the morning, I was prepared by Monday morning. I thought, I better just find out if I am. And my children had asked, Mom, are we breaking the law here?
What did you tell them?
I said, I don't believe we are, but it's always good to check. I'm just going to check into this. We should always question and look at things. And we started talking about how our government is set up, and how does it work, and what makes the United States what the United States is, and all the way to the current point of where we are and what's happening. And it's very confusing to a lot of people, which causes them to, even in my case, I said, I'm going to have to check on this. So I was opening up. Thank goodness that I save things, and I had some of my legislators guide. I'm just going down, and of course the legislation was not in session, so I'm leaving messages. And I happened to contact Senator Benton, and he did answer the phone.
So he was accessible?
He was accessible, and I had shared with him, and very quickly he said, Lisa, my mother had this very same problem, and I introduced legislation, Senate Bill 6064, and that supersedes what, and I said, oh, this is wonderful. Now, this all happened on the same day as the conversation with the manager, so the very first conversation.
Okay, so that first conversation with a representative was Senator Don Benton. He was very helpful. He had already seen the problem.
He was more worked up than I was.
So he cared about it more than you did.
Well, he was appalled that our rights are being infringed upon, and then I thought, maybe I should be appalled too. And this is the part, sadly, I can't say that this last year I didn't take a field trip with my kids up for them to see the Senate in action.
To Olympia?
But maybe we should. We're busy people. And so, just in that brief conversation, he said, let me send you that. He said, in fact, he recalled the day that the governor had signed it into law.
So it became law.
It became law, and he had introduced that because his mother had sort of, said, hey, I'm having a problem here. I can't put a sign out. And so I learned a lot about signs and such that day, and then...
So you had rights that were protected because of that law that said, no, they can't make you take that sign down. And you were standing on that. was there some consequence? Was the homeowners association responding and saying, well, so we told you to take it down, you didn't take it down, so here's the penalties, you're going to incur these fines or whatever, so much per day?
There were a couple of conversations. It seemed as though the day had just been lost, because I was a little bit scared, but yet I had my mother hat on, and so I'm thinking, I need to I need to research this so that I can clearly, lead our boys in the right direction.
How old are your boys?
We have a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old in the home right now.
So this is a real good exercise for them to see how our rights work here in this
and a real
country.
test as to what they're learning every day in school, because they were able to say, well, this is what we learned, and such. So the conversation did come up with the homeowner's manager, and because as I had called her back and I said, now hold on, you sent me this RCW, but now I have a copy of Senate bill and such, and
a newer one.
Yes, and I did ask the question.
Did they know about that?
She said she didn't think it really mattered. She felt very clear that
they were holding their
within
ground. They're
and such, and
insisting that you continue to follow their rules.
And so I asked the question. I said, now I'm in a period of discernment here on my sign, because this has to do
Meaning you're having to sort it out?
Yeah, what is the right thing to do here?
Okay.
And I don't know that anybody's difficult just for the sake of being difficult. But I do feel sometimes that I tend to be a little bit more vocal, and I also, there's a whole story from as this progresses that other people are kind of silently whispering, gosh, do you still have your signs? Go. And I was listening to that thinking, why are people whispering? Why are they afraid to use their voice? Why is no one else putting out a sign? And so interesting, when we first started talking here about are there other signs, I'm the only one still.
Out of all the political, we're in the middle of an election. There's no other signs in your neighborhood that has, I've been through a number of neighborhoods. There's a bunch of political signs in all the other neighborhoods.
Now, okay, there's one that's kind of just, it looks like they mowed and they kind of moved it to the side. There is another one up on the other section of Mount Vista that I did see, and I think maybe people are getting, we
lead by example.
Right.
And so basically you have become a leader to stand up. That's you're encouraging a little bit of boldness for people to stand on their rights. You want to be respectful for the law. You want to be law-abiding. You've got kids that are looking to see, are you going to be rebellious? So you don't want to be on any of those things, but at the same time, you're an American that needs to be able to stand on our rights, and courageous leadership starts at home. It starts right there.
Right.
When your rights are infringed, which in this, it looks to me like they are, then you say no, respectfully, and here's why. The U.S. Constitution still applies to my house in our neighborhood, and nobody can sign away those rights.
Right. Although it is a little scary because people know where you live, and it really, you have to walk the talk.
Did you contact an attorney at some point?
At that point, early on I hadn't, but I was in making the telephone calls started coming back. There seemed to be a dialogue
from the Homeowners Association?
No, I very specifically, there has been very little dialogue with the Homeowners Association. In fact, I was forward when the manager had explained to me that, okay, there are rules, and I said, I'm in a period of discernment. What's the process? What's going to happen here if I decide not to take my sign down? And she said, well, Lisa, this is your courtesy call. So
well, it was
we
being
give a
nice
call,
now.
And she said, we'll check on this, and if you haven't complied, then we'll send you a courtesy letter, of which I did receive in July.
Okay.
And then after that courtesy letter, then you get a more severe letter with fines attached. And if I'm remembering right, somewhere in the neighborhood of $100.
Did you receive that letter?
When I received the courtesy letter,
and that's you said in July?
It came in July.
That's certainly within 25 days of
it
the
was already,
election.
and this was the phenomenal part in that people who are trying to impose rules and making rules, and I understand homeowners associations can sometimes act as mini governments because they do create a contract, and so this has been an eye-opening experience. It's my first time living in an HOA territory, and I really, I've been asked, did you know it was HOA? Because didn't you know?
Association.
And I said, yes, I did, but I thought they were just not going to, they were going to tell me things like, make sure your grass is mowed, don't put any cars up on jacks out on the front street. Don't, and I thought, I'm not opposed to those. I like a nice, certain things kind of in the norm of how that is. I never dreamed that somebody would tell me. And now I'm just wondering if I go out and get a statue of Mary, is someone, because I've noticed there are no statues of Mary anywhere in my neighborhood. And I'm waiting for Mother's Day to come around and thinking, oh my goodness, if I get a statue of Mary, am I going to have to put her in the backyard?
Well, so at this point then, what you have is you receive the courtesy letter and you're waiting to see whether or not they're going to send you this other letter that says we're going to stick fines on this, you're going to incur fines.
Right.
You haven't received anything like that?
Not yet. And so the courtesy letter that came, there was about a 3-day period they were going to inspect the property. And it was very nebulously written in my books because it was a reiteration of the rules that I was in violation, but it didn't specifically say of which rule. And by that point, we were within the 45 days. And so word was kind of getting out, and I was getting offers of signs. And so signs were showing up for me to put out, and I'm
in other words, people wanted their signs put in your front yard.
Oh, people were offering, can you put this? And yeah, so, well, Don Benton was the first sign. I clearly put his sign. He was the first one because
As a homeowners association,
he was my hero.
Yeah.
And
Had they said anything about that?
So, well, of course, I received this letter, and at that point, we were within the 45-day mark, clearly. And so I phoned up once again and I said, now here's the thing. I said, you've given me 3 days to comply. This is not even time for, if I would want an attorney to respond, to be able to formulate something. And if I remember right, it may have been either a Wednesday or Thursday that I received the letter. So here we are, we're coming into, and the inspection was actually held, this is very odd to me, on Sunday. Of all things, they're inspecting a religious freedom sign on a Sunday. In other words,
somebody came out and they took a picture or something to see whether or not the sign's still there.
Well, I don't know that they took a picture. I had different people in the neighborhood walking, and one neighbor said to me, she walked all the way down, to where our house is, and when she came up, by this point, we were a little bit sensitive because we had people kind of gathering at different times in front of the sign, and my husband would go out and say, "Can I help you?" And so it was, I didn't know I was setting something up that, I didn't know how to take it. I didn't know how to respond.
For trouble.
And I had to, I had a neighborhood state of Washington employee who works in law enforcement came over and he was very friendly and said, Lisa, just for your own, because we've been watching this, and so do you know what assault is? I'm like, assault? What are we getting to here? And he said, well, if somebody comes onto your property, they are violating more than just, telling you can't have a sign, and if they, would even touch your arm. And I'm a very, I use my hands all the time, and all of a sudden I became alarmed that, you mean for the very fact if I just, rest my hand upon, your arm in support of what you're doing, that someone, if they wanted to, could pursue that as assault. But he said, I want you to be aware. And so the day that the one neighbor walked, and she said, I just wanted to talk with you about your sign, because I had written a nice letter about the senator to one of our papers, and it was printed, and she said, I read that, and I just thought maybe you didn't know the rule. And then
So basically, you've had a lot of conversation with your neighbors.
Yes.
There's a lot of interest in that. I've consulted an attorney or two on this as well, and here's what they told me.
Okay.
That regardless of what a homeowners association has in their rules, even if you move into the neighborhood and sign your name, and it says, I agree to abide by these rules, that it is illegal for anyone to claim that you must sign away your constitutional rights. The constitutional rights are the most fundamental rights there are, and that anybody can put up a political sign in their neighborhood, and they cannot regulate what content that sign can be. They can't say, well, we don't like it that it says this or that. You're not saying profanity, which is they can say something on that.
That wouldn't be right.
And they could also regulate in safety if it's blocking somebody's way or it's becoming a safety hazard for traffic or something like that.
Mine was behind daisies.
Yeah, no, none of this applies. So you're fine. So at this point, you are resting in, standing on your rights. The story is not finished. You haven't received any fine letters yet, and maybe they're standing down because they know that they are, hopefully they will know that they are treading on your constitutional rights, and they make themselves liable because when you violate somebody's constitutional rights, that is an aggression that is, you can sue for that. So hopefully this will resolve itself. The homeowners association individuals, they're just people. They realize that they did something wrong, that they can't violate your rights that way. And as this story unfolds a little bit further on, you'll be able to give us a feedback and say, well, let us know how it turned out. In the meantime, I encourage you to stand strong, respectfully, stand for your rights, and let your message be told, especially here during this election season. And let's see how it goes, okay?
Thank you.
Great. Good for you. I want to congratulate you. Okay, I guess that wraps it up. Thank you.